Most gardeners think there's one planting window in spring and that's it. Miss it and you wait until next year. That's wrong, and it's the single biggest reason home gardens underperform every single season. 12 vegetables have a second, hidden planting window most Americans never use, and skipping it is quietly costing you pounds of food every year. I'm walking you through all 12, with the exact dates, the zones, and the reason the timing matters more than the seed packet ever tells you. Before we start, drop your zone in the comments. I'll use that to build the region-specific version of this list next. Number 1 is spinach. Almost everyone plants this once in early spring and assumes that's the only shot. It isn't. Spinach actually performs better as a fall crop than a spring one because it bolts the moment daytime heat climbs, and spring planting puts it on a collision course with early summer warmth. The real window most people miss is 4 to 6 weeks before your first fall frost. Plant it then and the cooling temperatures push it towards sweeter, more tender leaves instead of the bitter, bolted mess spring plantings usually turn into. It handles zones 3 through 9 without much fuss, and a light frost afterward actually improves the flavor rather than damaging the plant. Bloomsdale is the variety most nurseries carry, and it holds up well against both cold and a touch of heat. One thing worth knowing, a floating row cover over a fall spinach bed can push your harvest window a full month later in colder zones, which matters if you want fresh greens into November. Number 2 is broccoli. Spring broccoli gets planted, hits a heat wave, and bolts into loose, bitter heads before it ever forms properly. That's the version most gardeners give up on. The better window is mid to late summer, timed so the plant matures during the cooling temperatures of fall instead of racing against rising heat. Count backward from your first frost date. Broccoli needs roughly 70 to 80 days depending on variety, and that's your real planting date. It grows reliably in zones 3 through 10 with this approach. Look for Bell Star or Marathon, both bred specifically to handle the temperature swing of a fall finish. Here's the part most people never hear. A light frost right before harvest actually sweetens the heads by converting some of the plant starches into sugars. Now here's something worth knowing before we go further. Number 8 on this list is a vegetable most Americans plant exactly once a year when it should be planted twice, and the second planting alone can double your total yield from the same bed. I'll get to it, but first, tell me honestly, are you a spring-only gardener, or have you already been experimenting with fall plantings? I want real answers in the comments because it shapes what I build next. Number 3 is carrots. Spring carrots are fine, but fall-planted carrots are genuinely better, and almost nobody grows them that way. Cold weather triggers the roots to convert stored starches into sugar as a natural antifreeze response, which means a carrot pulled after a frost tastes noticeably sweeter than the same variety pulled in July. The window is roughly 10 to 12 weeks before your first frost, which puts most zones planting in mid to late summer. Hardy in zones 3 through 10 with this method, and you can actually leave mature carrots in the ground under a heavy mulch layer and harvest them through most of winter in the milder zones. Danvers 126 and Napoli both hold their sweetness exceptionally well after cold exposure. The golden tip here, don't pull them right after the first frost, wait 1 to 2 more weeks. The sugar conversion keeps improving during that stretch. Number 4 is kale. Kale planted in spring is edible. Kale planted for a fall harvest is a completely different vegetable in terms of flavor. The same cold-triggered sugar conversion that improves carrots does even more for kale, stripping out the bitterness that turns a lot of people off the plant entirely. Plant 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost. It's hardy in zones 3 through 9, and mature plants will often survive temperatures into the low 20s without protection, continuing to produce through several hard frosts. Winterbore and Red Russian are the two varieties gardeners consistently come back to for fall growing. One detail that changes everything: harvest the outer leaves only and leave the center growing point intact, and a single fall planting will keep producing fresh leaves for months instead of one single cut-and-done harvest. Number 5 is beets. Most people plant beets once in spring and never revisit the idea. A second planting in mid to late summer, timed for a fall harvest, consistently produces sweeter roots and better greens than the spring crop does. The window sits around 8 to 10 weeks before first frost. Zones 3 through 10 handle this without issue. Detroit dark red remains the reliable standard, though Chioggia is worth growing if you want the striped interior for a dinner table conversation piece. The part most gardening advice skips entirely. Beet greens from a fall planting are noticeably more tender than spring greens, because the plant isn't racing against bolting the way it is in the heat of early summer. Number 6 is lettuce. Spring lettuce fights a losing battle against rising temperatures almost every single year, bolting into bitter, inedible stalks right as it should be at its best. Fall lettuce skips that fight completely. Plant 4 to 6 weeks before your first frost and the entire growing period happens in cooling conditions instead of rising ones. Hardy in zones 3 through 10 as a fall crop, and with a simple cold frame or row cover, harvest can extend well past your first frost date in a lot of regions. Winter Density and Rouge d'Hiver both hold up under cold stress far better than typical spring varieties. The tip nobody mentions: succession plant every 2 weeks through that fall window instead of one single sowing, and you get a rolling harvest instead of everything maturing and needing to be eaten at once. Number 7 is garlic, and this is the one that surprises people the most because it isn't a second planting window at all, it's the only planting window, and most gardeners are doing it at completely the wrong time. Garlic gets planted in fall, not spring, roughly 4 to 6 weeks before the ground freezes solid. It needs that cold exposure to properly form cloves the following summer. Plant it in spring instead, and you'll get a small, underdeveloped bulb that barely resembles what you bought at the store. Hardy in zones 3 through 9 with this fall timing. Music is the go-to hardneck variety for colder zones, while California early performs better in milder regions. One detail worth remembering: mulch heavily right after planting, 4 to 6 inches of straw, and the cloves will establish roots through winter without any risk of frost heave pushing them out of the ground. Now for number 8. Peas. Most gardeners plant peas exactly once, early spring, and consider the job done for the year. What almost nobody does is plant a second round in late summer for a fall harvest, and that second planting alone can effectively double your total pea yield from the same square footage. Count back roughly 7 to 8 weeks from your first frost date for the fall sowing. Zones 3 through 9 handle both plantings without trouble. Sugar Snap and Green Arrow are reliable for both windows, though the fall crop tends to produce sweeter pods thanks to the same cold-triggered sugar response showing up across this entire list. The golden fact here: soil temperature matters more than air temperature for pea germination in late summer, so water the bed heavily a day or two before sowing to cool the soil enough for the seeds to sprout reliably. Number 9 is radishes. These grow so fast that most people treat them as a single quick spring crop and move on. That's leaving easy food on the table. Radishes can be sown every 2 to 3 weeks from early spring straight through 6 weeks before your first fall frost, giving you 3 to 4 separate harvests instead of one. Hardy in zones 2 through 10 with this staggered approach. Cherry Belle finishes fastest for spring and summer sowings, while French Breakfast tends to hold better quality through the cooler fall window. One thing worth knowing: radishes planted in the heat of midsummer often turn woody and overly sharp, so skip that middle stretch and concentrate plantings in the cooler spring and fall windows instead. Number 10 is cabbage. Spring cabbage frequently splits or bolts the moment early summer heat arrives, right before it's ready to harvest. A fall-timed planting avoids that problem completely by maturing during cooling weather instead. Count back 70 to 75 days from your first frost date for transplanting timing. It's hardy in zones 3 through 9, and mature heads can tolerate frost down into the mid-20s without damage. Storage Number 4 and January King are both bred specifically for cold tolerance and long storage after harvest. The detail most people miss: fall cabbage stores in a root cellar or cold garage for months longer than spring cabbage does, because it developed under conditions that naturally prepare it for storage. Number 11 is Swiss chard. This one technically can be harvested nearly year-round in mild zones, but almost everyone treats it as a one-time spring planting and lets it peter out by midsummer. A second sowing in late summer restarts the whole cycle and often outperforms the spring planting entirely, since it matures into cooler, more favorable conditions. Plant 8 to 10 weeks before your first frost for the fall round. Hardy in zones 3 through 10, and in zones 7 and warmer, a fall planting will often overwinter and keep producing straight through to the following spring. Bright Lights and Fordhook Giant are the two varieties most consistently available, and both perform well under this method. One tip worth remembering: cut individual outer leaves rather than the whole plant, and a single fall sowing can keep feeding you for 6 months or longer. Quick honest question before the last one. Out of everything covered so far, which vegetable are you planting a second time this year that you've only ever grown once before? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know which of these actually changes what people put in the ground this season. Number 12 is turnips. Most people either skip turnips entirely or plant them once in spring and never think about them again. A fall planting produces noticeably sweeter roots and, as a bonus, gives you a second harvestable crop from the same plant in the form of the greens, which are entirely edible and often overlooked. Plant 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost. Hardy in zones 2 through 9, and like carrots and beets, the roots convert starches to sugar after cold exposure, meaning a turnip pulled after frost tastes fundamentally different from one pulled in summer heat. Purple Top White Globe remains the standard, reliable variety nationwide. The part almost nobody mentions: you can harvest the greens repeatedly through the growing period without damaging the root's development, effectively getting 2 vegetables out of one planting. That's all 12. Every one of them proving the same point, that the calendar most gardeners follow only tells half the story, and the second window is very often the better one. If any of these change what you plant this fall, or you've already been doing one of these without realizing why it worked, tell me which one in the comments. And if this saved you from wasting another growing season only using half your planting calendar, that's exactly why subscribing matters. The next list breaks down the mistakes turning good soil into dead soil before you even realize it's happening.